Welcome everyone. This video is going to give you some necessary context for understanding the Spanish-American War. After watching this video, you should be able to identify the European country that controlled Cuba in the late 1800s, and you should be able to explain some of the main reasons why both the Cubans and people in the United States thought that the Cubans would be better off without a European power controlling them. Here's the important background. In the late 1800s, the United States was getting more and more powerful, and to many Americans, Cuba was starting to look like a good place to use some of that power. From Americans' perspective, Cuba was beautiful. It's close, only about 90 miles from Florida, and products produced in Cuba, like sugar, could be produced there, and American businessmen could then sell it to people in the United States. Furthermore, American businessmen saw the Cuban people as potential customers who would buy American goods. To Americans, being involved in Cuba looked like a great move. However, in the late 19th century, Cuba was not a free country. They were actually controlled by Spain. Spain used to have one of the largest, most powerful empires on the entire planet. Just as an example, in 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed for Spain and claimed the Americas for the Spanish king and queen. However, in the 3 centuries between Columbus's landing in the Americas and the beginning of the Spanish-American War, events had not gone Spain's way. Spain's once mighty empire had been in decline for about 300 years, and by the time the United States went to war with Spain, some of Spain's few colonial possessions included the Philippines, which is over here, Guam, Puerto Rico, and of course, Cuba. Now, the Cubans were not particularly pleased to be part of the once mighty Spanish Empire. They felt that they were not sufficiently represented in the government, that the Spanish authorities were corrupt, and that the taxes were too high. The Cubans rebelled, and after 10 years of fighting, the Spanish made a few reforms to appease the Cubans that cooled tensions between the Spanish and Cubans a little until the Cuban economy collapsed. That financial crisis gave men like exiled Cuban revolutionary Jose Marti good reason to once again start calling for revolution and independence from Spain. The fighting between Spain and Cuba would be intense. The Spanish sent 150,000 troops and one of their best generals, Valeriano Weyler, who had a reputation for being terrible. Weyler put a number of Cubans, which included women, children, and the elderly, into awful reconcentration camps, surrounded with barbed wire, insufficient sanitation, and not enough to eat. As a consequence, 200,000 Cubans died from starvation and disease. News of those Spanish atrocities reached America in sensational news stories, where Americans were appalled to hear how the Spanish were treating the Cubans. So the stage was set. Due in large part to the yellow press, Americans are mad about how Spain is treating Cuba, and there's interest from American businessmen who saw Cuba as a market for American goods. And influential men like Jose Marti was calling for independence from Spain. Now that you've watched this video, you should have a better idea of why the Cubans did not want the Spanish to rule over them and why Americans sympathized with their neighbors to the south. Now we can look a little bit more closely at the Spanish-American War. Thanks for watching. Here's a random joke. Why did the spies call the exterminator? They thought the room was bugged.